John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Arizona is now ground zero for illegal border crossings as Texas has made moves to fortify their border with Mexico. The cartels predictably are moving people now to the path of least resistance. And that is us, Arizona. And much of this battle now has shifted to local and county sheriffs to pick up the pieces of a broken, porous border. Yavapai County Sheriff David Rhodes is the president of the Arizona Border Sheriffs Association and joins me now on Newsmaker. Great to see you, Sheriff. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it as well.
How much crime associated with illegal immigration are you seeing in Yavapai County, which is a little more north, obviously?
Yeah, well, we're seeing the usual things that you see: a little bit of increased drug trafficking. We're a little more insulated up here. Human trafficking, unfortunately, we're seeing more of that. We have human trafficking specialized detectives working full-time here at the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office for the first time ever. They're beginning to uncover some of these things, but we've taken a pretty aggressive approach to crime fighting here in Yavapai. So we're still doing very well compared to some other parts of the state and certainly other parts of the country.
David, the detainer, I'm trying to remember the number. Give it to me. What is the ICE detainer?
It's 287G.
287G. Thank you. How does that stand right now in your county and other counties in Arizona? In other words, first explain it, what it means and what power it gives you.
Yeah, you bet. So, as most people know, immigration enforcement is reserved for the federal government. It's a statutory delegate, or not a statutory, it's a constitutional delegation to the federal authorities, and a bunch of case law has reaffirmed that over the years. So local law enforcement is very limited in the things that they can do, that we can do to help with immigration enforcement. But there is a federal code, and 287G is short for that federal code, that USC, which basically allows DHS to delegate to law enforcement agencies, particularly sheriffs, the ability to do some initial screenings and develop probable cause as to whether somebody is in the country illegally. Now, this is done at the jails. And what's key to this is that if somebody is arrested for a state crime, be it drug dealing or anything like that, they are arrested, they're booked into the jail, and our jail staff under that agreement have the ability to screen them for their immigration status and initiate what's called a detainer process, ask ICE to hold them, and so to the completion of their state charges, and then we hand them over to ICE for deportation. Other counties that don't have a 287G agreement can still be a part of the process, but they have to notify ICE, and ICE has to initiate that detainer process.
As a sheriff, David, you have to ask for that right. In other words, you want that power. In your case, you guys have it. You've asked for it, right? So
100%. You want that power. You want the ability to know if these people are in the country illegally. You don't want to be releasing violent criminals. And I'll give you an example, John. If somebody is arrested and let's say they've committed an aggravated assault or a home invasion robbery or something like that, and they see a judge, the judge has to set the bond for them. And that person, if they have the resources, they could post the bond and get out of jail right away, and we wouldn't be able to stop them. And they would be they could potentially be unknown as to who they are in the country illegally and a dangerous person. This allows us to protect the public by making sure that dangerous criminals are not just being released back to the street when we don't know who they are.
Does that mean you've got to hold them? They're not in an ICE facility. You've got to hold them, right?
Yeah, we hold them in the jail until the state charges are completed or there's a release, and then ICE has, I believe, 2 days to come and pick them up and deport them, initiate their deportation proceeding.
The million-dollar question. When ICE gets a hold of them, depending on directives from DOJ and the administration that's currently in power, what happens to them then?
Well, that is the $1 million question, and you're dabbling in politics a little bit there, John. But the reality is the federal administration, the federal executive administration, sets those policies, and where they want to put their resources and who they want to deport from the country. And certain administrations have been more aggressive about that. Others have been more lax about it, and we don't control that. But what we do is, like I said, identify if they're here in the country illegally, if they've committed crimes, and hand them over to ICE.
Okay, can you tell me, there are sheriffs in Arizona that don't really seem to want this power. What would be the reason for that?
Well, I think that they think perhaps it's a burden, perhaps it's a community issue, perhaps the politics in their particular county, it's not supported by the constituency or anything like that. And I can't say specifically of a sheriff who just doesn't want to do it. However, anybody who doesn't want to use that authority, I find it unfortunate, because our job is public safety. And this is a tool, one of the few tools that allows local law enforcement and the sheriffs to work with the federal authorities on immigration enforcement. Legally, it's been supported by the courts. We all should be taking advantage of this to protect our communities.
Yeah, and I've always said that we're a nation of immigrants. We all know this. And I think 95% of Americans probably think legal immigration is a great thing and has made the country great. But we happen to have enough yahoos on our own in here committing crimes without importing more criminals.
Well, that's 100% correct. And you're seeing some of these things play out nationally, unfortunately. The murder of the nursing student in Georgia, the police beatings in New York, all of these things. We don't need those kind of people in the country. If you're here in America, we expect that you are going to obey our laws. Now, if you came here illegally, in my opinion, you shouldn't be here. You should be trying to come here legally. You're right. This is we are a nation of immigrants. The legal pathways need to be there. Maybe there needs to be immigration reform or whatnot, but we don't need more of that.
Can you speak to something that's often brought up by detractors of these kinds of policies? They say, listen, you're going to make these communities reluctant to cooperate and help police and law enforcement. Is that something you've encountered?
Yeah, that's an argument that we've dealt with. We've heard that argument before, but I don't believe that, because we're simply saying if you break the law and you get arrested, you're at risk of being deported. Everybody should be held accountable if they're breaking our laws here in this country. And if you don't want to be turned over to ICE, just don't break our laws.
In the case of Laken Riley, which is getting so much attention, the common refrain is, well, this guy's from Venezuela, and we don't have any agreement to send him back to Venezuela. And I guess as a citizen, I look at it and say, if we flew one of our military jets back to Venezuela, would they really have the ability to stop us dumping this guy out on the tarmac?
I 100% agree with you, John. Why in the world are we taking instructions from a country like Venezuela that we have to take their criminals and leave them here in America because they don't want them back? If we took them back and dropped them off and said, these are your citizens, these are your people, you need to deal with them, I don't know how they would stop it.
Prescott is your biggest city in Yavapai County?
Yes, it is.
Okay. The folks in Prescott, how much of this occupies their time and worry? Are people there worried about this issue?
Absolutely. This is the number one topic. And I'm out in the community all the time, speaking at community events and whatnot. And this is the number one thing that I'm asked about, hands down. And not just me, but everybody that goes out, that's from the government, from law enforcement. They want to know, are we in danger here? What are we going to do? What is the plan? This is not sustainable. And I was at an event last night spoke this morning, got to speak tomorrow night. And we're constantly working with our legislators to try to, propose any legislation, get anything that we can through the legislature, hopefully get it signed by the governor. This is the number one topic.
Is that the number one topic among people of any political persuasion?
Yeah, it is. It is. We are, there's a number of people that have talked to me and they said, hey, is this the usual rhetoric and hyperbole about the border?
Yes.
And I always tell them, no, this is not. In my 30 years in law enforcement, the sheriffs that are on the border, the law enforcement professionals in the state, it has never been like this.
Can I ask you one more before we go?
Sure.
As the president of the Arizona Border Sheriffs, and you're more on the interior, so it's interesting that you're the president of that, even though you're not a border county.
I'm the president of the Arizona Sheriff's Association, which includes the border counties.
Okay, thank you for that. But if there were one thing that you would want, what would it be? What do you guys need?
We need the border secured. You can't manage any of this until the border is secured. And that was one of the problems with the border bill, John, is that, it did not secure the border first. Until and unless the rest of the world, understands this one basic principle of law enforcement, that if people believe the laws are going to be enforced, they're more likely to follow them. If people are afraid of the consequences of breaking the law, they're more likely to follow them. Right now, people don't believe that the laws are going to be enforced on our southwest border, and they're not afraid of the consequences. And that's why law enforcement is failing. And that's a policy position that this federal administration has got to take. They've got to change. The resources, yes, we need that. Yes, we need all the policy changes into different things. But until it is communicated clearly that our laws will be enforced and you have to come here legally and we will welcome you with open arms, we're going to get more of this.
Sounds pretty simple to me. Yavapai County Sheriff David Rhodes, president of the Arizona Sheriff's Association. Great to see you. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time, John.
We'll see you soon. David Rhodes. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker. Welcome back to Newsmaker. This November, Arizona voters will decide on a ballot measure designed to support Arizona first responders. The measure is known as the Back the Blue Act. It would strengthen criminal penalties for anyone who assaults a first responder and increases survivor benefits to the families of first responders killed in the line of duty. That proposition was referred to the ballot by the Arizona State Legislature last year with strong bipartisan support. Tom Hatten, CEO of Mountainside Fitness, chairman of the Back the Blue campaign, joins me now on Newsmaker. Great to see you again, Tom.
You too, John. Thanks for having me.
I take it this was an easy one to get behind.
Yeah, it was. It was interesting when they brought it to my attention that this had made the ballot in November. The first question I had is it possible to speak to some of the police unions, fire unions, first responders, you name it, police chiefs, just to get their input on what it's been like in the last few years and what they hope to see from something like this.
And what did they tell you?
Well, it was interesting. Their responses, ironically, were all the exact same. They are in dire straits, first and foremost, to get support for all first responders. I mean, everybody from EMTs, fire, police, Department of Corrections, just to get some support around their careers and what they're going through. And I felt, as I understood their predicament even greater than just the public spotlight, I was destined to get more involved to try to bring more attention to getting this passed in November.
Tom, did they express to you this feeling that somehow that dividing line that we always used to have between the public and a respect for law enforcement, that line has crumbled, and that people now, it's been open season on challenging police, attacking police, stuff that was fairly rare in the past. started to happen with, greater and greater numbers. Were they expressing a concern that somehow that relationship that had been very well established for years is kind of crumbling?
They all expressed exactly that. You put it really perfectly on this. And it was interesting to start hearing some statistics from all of them. One was, for example, pre-COVID, we had an average of 3,000 applicants to the police academy a year. Now, 300 applicants. The increasing number of retirees from the forces, from fire, from police, EMTs, you name it, day after day, it's dwindling the numbers. And they feel like there's just this giant disconnect out there, and they're looking for anything to help garner these numbers to increase the support on what they do. And it was really sad to hear, and also scary to hear. As somebody who's a lifelong Arizona and certainly has a business here forever, to see that and to hear it in their voices was difficult and concerning.
Tom, let's talk about the measure itself, Back the Blue. What would it do if passed?
I think the first thing, and I looked at this just a citizen, is show support. It's a measure that easily shows support for all first responders. That, I feel like, is our duty to do as citizens here in Arizona. It allows the death benefits for the families to be increased to $250,000 payable within 30 days. Right now, that comes as long as a year to 2 years from the different municipalities. It's all different numbers. And here's the interesting part about it. It doesn't come from the taxpayers. This benefit comes from the criminals themselves. Every assault, every criminal conviction in the state of Arizona has a $20 fine that will go into the state fund that will then be divvied out in the event of a fallen officer. It can only be divvied out. In 2021, there was 87,000 criminal convictions. 77% of them paid a fine. That's $1.3 million in fines. I think that's real important. So these families know that we as Arizonans are behind them, and we're going to say to the criminals, no more. This is enough. There's more penalties to come. The felony counts will move up 1 if you assault a first responder in the act of a crime, to go from a felony 4 to a 3 to a 2. All that is in response to this ballot measure there to support all of our first responders.
There are other states doing this. I saw that Iowa has already passed this. I think Nebraska is looking at it or on the precipice of making that law as well. And there were attempts actually in the U.S. House of Representatives to get a national. It's a little different. It affects different things. But it was also called Back the Blue. And I think Senator Kennedy from Louisiana was involved in that. John Cornyn from Texas was involved in that. There have been efforts in Washington. Do you know where those stand, and are they at all in conflict with what we would do?
Well, I think right now when you say the word Washington, you have to use stand still in conjunction with that. I mean, I just think in general, they're worried about budgets and border crisis and everything else. It just seems like this has just dropped way down on the list. And I think it's why it's so important for states like Arizona to jump out and just do something to do this, which should be bipartisan. This is, I think, a simple yes for all the reasons we just discussed. From that, I think other states, like you said, Iowa and Nebraska and all our neighboring states should follow. And then, as Washington sees fit, to get that on the books as well nationally. So maybe you get it going in the states. I'm trying to think of what the blowback was in Washington against it, because I think they tried in 2021, and then I think they're working on it in 2023 going into now. So it obviously didn't get passed in 2021, and I'm not sure why. I don't know if you do, but I don't. Here in Arizona, this also applies to paramedics. That was an interesting component. This applies to not just police and fire. Who all does it cover? You mentioned corrections as well. Yep. Yeah. Department of Corrections, EMTs, looking at the list. National Guard. That's an interesting one that's really gotten louder in the last few years, right? So it's first responders in the mentality of those who have put and to continue to put their lives on the line for all of us. That is part of their job description. Few have that job description. So this ballot measure covers all first responders. And I think that's important for everybody to understand. It's just not about the police, fire. It is about Department of Corrections, EMTs. You wouldn't believe the amount of assaults on EMTs in the act of helping somebody that is committed a crime and is injured. It's staggering to hear those kind of numbers.
Yeah, I've seen it in the field. I mean, it's a very dangerous line of work, especially if you're dealing with somebody who's drug-addled and not of their sound mind. It's dangerous work. Tom, do you think this is an easy pass with voters? Is there any opposition that you know of, and what would that be to this measure? Is there a concern about costs to the taxpayer? I know you said it would be paid by fines to the criminals, but would that cover all of it? Because that's a pretty hefty payout.
Yeah, it's a hefty payout. And the interesting thing is, on average, I hate talking about this, but we need to. There's an average of 5 first responders that have been killed in the line of duty per year. In 21, we had 87,000 criminal convictions, which would have garnered, about $1.4 million. They did pay about $0.4 million in fines. Unfortunately, those numbers are going up, but I think it's more important that the taxpayers know they are the ones paying for this. They're the ones creating the crimes. They're the ones with the assault. So there shouldn't be any opposition. I find it hard to understand why there would be any opposition. And I think that's why I feel like it's so big on this ballot. I'm not interested in just passing it. I'm interested in passing it at 80 to 90%. To show everybody what Arizona is all about when it comes to supporting all of us.
That's interesting. So it's a statement as much as a hand up to families and officers impacted by crime against them.
I think that's Arizona's role today. I think that's what our role is going to be in November, is to make a statement about what we support and how we support it as a state, as a community, for all these first responders and what they're going through and what they have been going through, and say that we are here for you, and we're going to toughen up this, and we're going to do this in a united front, and we're going to show you in November. And this isn't a Republican measure. This isn't a Democratic measure. This is an Arizona citizen measure in support of all of our first responders.
This will go in the backdrop of a very divided electorate, and we're just a few years out of the wake of the George Floyd and the protests and Black Lives Matter, and a real move to try to defund police in many cities. I mean, we've all seen that.
Yep.
And conversely, we've seen the fallout and the downside of that.
Yeah, and you can see it and you can hear it in speaking with the police officers and the firemen and even the EMTs when I was speaking with them. And it was just, it's trepidation, it's fear of what is happening to their jobs and to the partnership with the citizens of the state of Arizona and really nationally, everybody. And it's hard to deal with sound bites and do your job every day. And that's what they've been doing for years now. And it's been crumbling, as you said, and to hear them so worried about how do they even recruit somebody to be a police officer or a firefighter. And they went on to tell me all the issues in those jobs, more than we can even imagine. And I just sat there speechless. It felt like this is something I can be a part of. I'm willing to debate anybody who feels like this isn't a good idea coming up for all of our safety and for their jobs and us as a community.
Tom Hatten, appreciate your time on this. Back the Blue, which will be on the November ballot. We appreciate it. And if there is that opposition out there, we'll certainly welcome them on the program. And if you guys want to go at it, that'll be fun.
Thanks, John.
Okay, great to see you, Tom.
Have a good one.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Tom Hatten. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker. Thanks as always for joining us. We will see you next week on Newsmaker.